All shall know the wonder
of purple summer.
All right.
Wow, that was glorious.
We just performed the entirety of Spring Awakening before this podcast opened.
I hope there's someone who just listened to that on their drive-in to work and felt motivated to have a great day.
I also hope that. I hope my musical, my voice has that power.
Oh,
for
yeah.
people.
Well, we're always trying to harmonize. And
Trying is the key
Sing.
word. They're always trying.
Well, that's how you get better, right?
I do not consider myself to be a vocalist in any stretch of the imagination, but I like to try.
Well, you are quite good with being able to hear sound cues in music.
I've heard that before.
Yes.
I've heard that before.
And you're also very good at knowing if someone is singing the correct notes and is on key.
Thank you.
So
Even
you
though
could
I
be a
can't,
singer if you wanted to.
if I wanted to, I probably could, but I don't have that kind of commitment. But, speaking of just songs and singing, we've got a new show to start tackling.
Oh, we sure
Miranda. So on our last episode, we wrapped up our experience with Heathers, and
Yep.
now we're back, and it's
the Song of Purple Summer.
It's the Song of Purple Summer, and it's spring is going to be awakened.
Oh, God. It's a little gross.
Spring Awakening.
Spring Awakening. If you didn't pick up on all the hints,
Yes.
that's what we're talking about today.
Summer 2018.
Oh, boy.
It has been a minute. I, prior to this week's conversation, just listened to the entire cast album. And I was having a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions. Not just listening to the music, but just thinking back through this process. A lot of emotions. It is a beautiful show. It is a really beautiful show. The music is incredible. Very sad, but very impactful, and you feel something at the end. And those are my favorite types of musicals, when you can just feel something at the very end. And I want to say, you have joked about this, and my style of musical theater is just I'm a big fan of minimalist. I like those artsy shows, and I feel like this production in particular, both of us were going through our artsy phase.
Oh, yeah.
When I think about it.
Yeah.
There were so many great things about it, but we have so much to unpack.
Yeah, definitely artsy phase, and I love rock shows, which is just kind of what I've been discovering. We're about to do Rock of Ages. One of my favorite shows was American Idiot. Spring Awakening was one of my favorite shows for a long time. So the music style definitely speaks to me. And I also think I was very attracted to the level of angst in the musical. Very excited about tackling that. It was Heather's angst, but more serious. It took itself a lot more seriously than Heather's did. So it was kind of I think it was a step up from our company reputation in a way. Definitely kind of solidifying us in the community as a theater company that also does serious shows and artsy shows. So it was all very exciting, and I don't know how well you remember the initial conversations about Spring Awakening.
I remember very little.
So one of the first conversations we had about it, I remember I was in a Goodwill and I saw that they had a bunch of desks. And I had sent you a picture, and you were like, if this is your choice for summer 2018, I'm all for it. Something like that is what you said. So I bought all the desks, and then guess what? We decided they were too modern anyway, so we ended up building the desks. So I was stuck with 6 desks that we didn't use. But that's kind of how that conversation had started. And I'd love to hear more about your history with the show, but for me, I loved this show for a long time. When I was a kid, my parents were going to take us to see something on Broadway for the first time, and Spring Awakening was playing on Broadway. I'm gonna out my age. People can research it, I guess, and figure out how old I was. But Spring Awakening was playing on Broadway at the time, and had talked about taking us to see it, taking me and my brother to see it, and one of my dad's friends had seen it and just loved it, like, so much. So he was talking to her, and she was like, yeah, don't take them to see that show. It's very adult. So they didn't. We saw Phantom instead. But it does a little bit kill me to this day because I could have seen the original Broadway cast in Spring Awakening.
Yeah.
Which would have been something. But I also think I wasn't at an age to appreciate it quite yet. I mean, I was, like, when I saw Phantom, there's an opening scene where he, like, one of the guys struggles to get up on the elephant. And I didn't realize that was a choice. I thought it was a mistake because I didn't understand the concept of professional theater yet. So I do think jumping right into a show like Spring Awakening probably wasn't the best choice.
Yeah.
But I do still think about that and how, like, I was so so close. But how I did end up seeing it is my dad found a recording of it on YouTube, and it was one of those, like, bad recordings with the shaky camera, and you know, you've seen 100 of them probably.
Sure.
And it was the original cast, and at the time I was really into Glee, so I know who Leah Michele was.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my introduction to Spring Awakening. Is we were flying to Orlando for a Disney trip, and he was like, here's something to do on the plane, and he handed me his iPad, and it was the recording of Spring Awakening. And I had started watching it, and then I actually finished it when I was home. But I just remember having this, like, moment of, whoa, I didn't know theater could be like this. And because I had that moment, it was my favorite show for a really long time because it totally changed my perspective on the art form that I was already kind of like growing to love. So that was my first interaction with the show. I loved the show, and I feel like that kind of set me up to be this. I don't know that I want to use the word advocate, but I guess, like, proponent of producing and working on controversial shows. I think it's so important, and I think the material, especially when a show is done with such care, like Spring Awakening is, and the way that it's written, when you're able to present that to an audience and it makes them mad or makes them sad or makes them think, all of those reactions are wins, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it starts a conversation that they wouldn't have otherwise maybe had. So it definitely kind of set me on that path of, like, hey, these are really important shows to be doing, and I'm really grateful that we have this platform where we get to present them at times. Obviously, we do a mixture, but we've definitely been able to present some really, like, a challenging and controversial work, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah. I mean, my personal experience with Spring Awakening, like, I'm trying to think back of the first time that I was ever aware of it. I know my brother had gone to see the original Broadway production. This was after the original cast had left.
Okay.
And I just remember him telling me just how emotional of an experience it was, and, like, how impactful the show was, and how it was moving, like, how it moved a lot of the people that were with him on that trip that he went to see the show. And beyond that, I mean, I remember seeing it done in community theater in our area, a few years after that, once it was available for licensing. And it was so interesting to me that the subject matter, it's a period piece that is so relevant to today.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's based off of a play. But told in this way that is very, very relevant and uses a lot of these modern storytelling techniques to present the story in a way that is so, I don't necessarily, digestible is not the right word, because it definitely, it has a lot of intense subject matter. It covers a lot of very important topics, but it tells it in a way that is more approachable to an audience, to today's present day audience.
Yeah.
Which I find really interesting. The first time I saw a professional production of it, though, was, I want to say it was 2015. There was a revival of it on Broadway.
Yep.
That was, it was told with sign language, and many of the characters had speaking versions of themselves, and also actors playing the roles using sign language. Mm-hmm. And it was another really unique way to tell the story, and highlighting the misunderstanding that can happen when conversations aren't had and that education isn't shared. And I think about that production a lot, because I'm a big fan of when a revival of a show can elevate the material and really present it in a different lens. Like, I'm all for, this big splashy, like, let's do this 1950s musical the exact same way it was done in the 50s, because people love that type of stuff. I'm a big fan of that. But if you can find a new way to present material in a way that makes it more engaging, but also tells the story in a unique way, I'm all for that type of theater. And I remember seeing that show and just being really moved by the thought process there, and that kind of mindset with that. So that was, I like to say that that's kind of like my first like real moment of like getting to know that show and getting to really understand the subject matter and like appreciating it as a musical theater fan, was seeing that production.
Yeah.
Like you mentioning that story about the desks, I kind of have a faint memory of that moment. I think coming off of the process with Heathers, I think both of us, I don't necessarily want to speak for you, but I know we've had this conversation a lot. I think we were so excited to just see how we could grow as a company, and Spring Awakening just seemed like a natural next step. It was, we were super happy with the turnout from our audience and the response that we got from our audience. We were still in this mindset of we wanted to do shows that were challenging subject matter, but were stories that people needed to hear and needed to be aware of. They were important stories to tell, and I think we were very focused at the beginning, and actually honestly through that entire process, of realizing that we were in a very unique position of getting to tell these stories that people don't typically hear. And I was very proud of that piece of it, and having that opportunity at the very beginning, I was 100% on board with signing up for and figuring out a way to do that.
Yeah, and I think it was unique too, because I mean, obviously, like, our company was unique in this way, but you don't normally get a production team of young adults.
Right.
And this particular story was about, teenagers to young adults. And I think because we were so close to that age, we were also able to provide a unique perspective that the show doesn't normally get from the creative standpoint. I mean, normally you have people those ages portraying the roles, but you don't have people those ages thinking about what the set's going to look like, what the costumes are going to look like, what their blocking and choreography is going to be. And I do think that put us in a unique situation, because it was kind of, in this way, a group of I'll say kids, for all intents and purposes. We were adults, but barely, right? Yeah. And it's kind of like this group of kids putting on this show and showing this to their community, and I think that's really powerful. I will say we got a little cocky after Heathers.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe not a little, maybe a lot. And we were like, yeah, we can sell 6 performances of this, no problem. That was too big of a jump. It was, for Heathers, we had 3 performances, jumping from 3 to 6. And I think that was a big moment, like a big learning moment for me and you, realizing that just because we love the show doesn't mean the community knows what the show is and or loves the show. So we did discover, and we'll get to that when we talk about performances, like, the demand wasn't there for Spring Awakening like it was for Heathers. And we have ticket-related conversations all the time to this day of, like, why isn't this show selling? Like, we, a great example is we just did Pippin, and both, like, it was a success by, every measure, but you and I both thought it would sell more tickets than it did.
Absolutely.
And I think it's so hard to tell because, our thought process was there's name recognition. It hasn't really been done in this area very much. And we promoted the crap out of it.
Yes.
So we were just kind of like, what are we missing? And I think it's so challenging and thought-provoking from a business perspective, and we always have conversations. You'll even call me and be like, I love the business, Miranda. Hey, tell me what our numbers are today. And it's this interesting game where there are just so many variables, but this was kind of the start of that thought process that I'm sure we will continue to have for as long as we do this.
Absolutely.
Which is, why are people seeing the shows that they're seeing? Why are they responding the way they are? What gets people in the theater when they haven't heard of the show before?
Absolutely.
Just a lot of questions that there's no right answer to. There's only speculation, but I do kind of love it, and it does kind of get addicting to think about.
Absolutely. Well, and I still think about, we do have these conversations every show, but from the framework and what we had to do in order to promote Spring Awakening, I feel like that was our initial experience of like, the show is not where we want it to be as far as ticket sales are. What do we need to do to help improve them? And we tried a whole host of things, which I know we can talk about more as we get through the show. But it was a really big learning opportunity for us that I feel like has helped us as we've gone through this process now with the multitude of shows that we've completed up to this point.
And it was also a challenge, and I'm directing a show now that I've heard similar challenges with, where it's a situation where your cast is actively talking at rehearsal of, oh yeah, I told my parents not to come to this one, or I told cousin Susie not to come to this one, or whatever. And I understand, but at the same time, family and friends, that's where like I don't know, I can't even put a real number on it, but I would say almost half of our sales usually come from family and friends.
Absolutely.
So the show I'm directing right now, POTUS, or Behind Every Great Dumbass, are 7 women trying to keep him alive, which is a rated R play. And I've overheard some cast members being like, yeah, I told mom and dad not to come to this one. And I'm like, how about you warn mom and dad and you let them make the decision?
Exactly.
That's just my opinion on it. I think sometimes we assume that our family members aren't going to be as understanding as they actually would be in reality. I think it's tough because when I hear those things, especially in the context of Spring Awakening, I'm like, oh, but those are the people that need to see it.
Absolutely.
If you're saying stuff like, oh, I told them not to come, they need to be in that theater and they need to experience that, because those are the people that need to be talking about this stuff.
For sure.
But that's their battle, that's their fight. That's not my fight, but it is something that I think about, and I've had conversations with my parents about it. I auditioned for a production of Spring Awakening when I was still in high school. I was 17, 16 maybe. And I was not cast, but I did audition, and we had a conversation before I auditioned of like, I'm a minor. Is this something you guys would be comfortable with me doing on stage? And we talked about it. And I know that not every family like has that relationship where they can have those conversations, but I do encourage people to try, because when you're able to have those conversations, even though they're difficult in the moment, they help your relationship with anyone. It brings you closer. It establishes trust. It establishes boundaries. So important to like, have that dialogue. So I was very lucky in that sense. But yeah, I think that partially impacted the sales, because we were working with a lot of young adults who were not comfortable with their family members seeing them do some of the things in the show.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive deeper into that conversation when we get to the performances, because I remember trying to explain to my family what the show was. At the time, like growing up, both my grandparents, both sets of grandparents were very on board with like supporting musical theater. And I remember my grandmother asking, and not just asking, she was saying, I'm coming to your show. And I would kind of give her just a very brief synopsis, and she said, I don't care, I'll be at your show. And it's just a really interesting conversation how, like, you think that people may not be ready for that material, or it may not be something that they're interested in, or they might not get. You never really know until you have that opportunity and you let them decide for themselves.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation of don't preemptively censor your family members.
Exactly.
But yeah, I definitely, like, I guess we should give some context of the show for someone listening who knows literally nothing about the show. The show is about teenagers who are in their community. It's a very religious community. And these teenagers are, going through puberty, and they don't know anything about intimacy or how their bodies are changing, nothing, except for one character who finds a book about it and starts to inform the other kids about it. And they basically, I feel like I'm explaining this poorly. Spoiler alert, skip ahead if you don't want spoilers for Spring Awakening. So the end of Act 1, two of the characters end up having sex. And it's two of the teenagers. And the girl, Venla, ends up being pregnant. And then the adults around her encourage her to get an abortion. And it was botched, and she ends up dying. There's another character who is constantly in trouble at school and, like, can't express himself and ends up killing himself. It's very dark show. It does have funny moments. The music slaps. There's some great music in it. But it's a difficult conversation of how do the adults around teenagers influence them in ways that are intentional and unintentional? How does religion influence community in ways that are intentional and unintentional? What are the consequences of, portraying religion in X way versus other way? It starts a lot of difficult conversations that not everyone is necessarily mentally prepared to have when they go into the theater. So yeah, when we say this is a challenging subject matter, that's what we mean. And it deals with a lot, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said the S word. I should have said unalived. I think that's the proper term we're supposed to use now. So trigger warning. We'll put a trigger warning at the top of the episode. But yeah, it was very, very heavy, but also just like a very powerful experience to be a part of.
Yeah, it definitely was a powerful show, and I think that's a good starting place for if we want to talk about auditions a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
What that process looked like.
Yeah.
Very similar to Grease and Heathers, we were back at our usual audition space. I don't remember a whole lot from that audition process, but we did have some new members of our production team for the show. Yes. And I think that played a unique role in our process of how we were handling auditions a little bit. There was a big focus on the music piece of it, making sure people could handle the vocals, handle the story, handle the emotion. So there's just a lot that went into those auditions. But do you have any clear memories from auditions? My mind's a little...
Yeah, I have some. This show, we are going to talk about some difficult things that happened during this show. This was one of the more difficult production processes we've had. Beautiful result.
Absolutely.
Show was gorgeous. Still very, very proud of how the show turned out. But this is Small Town Snark, and we're here to spill the tea, and that's our job today. So we're going to spill it. And this was the first show, and I can't remember very many shows after this where this has happened, but there was someone in a leadership role who did not take me seriously. And that was tough. I got vibes in our first meeting, but it was kind of I needed someone to fill this role, and they were qualified, and I was hoping it would work out. And it became very clear very quickly that they weren't interested in anything that we had to say. And I think when you're when you're our age, we were very young at the time, and we're trying to do something very big. That's very discouraging when you have someone come in and it's like your biggest fear, right? Mm-hmm. Is having someone come in and basically not taking you seriously and like undermining you a lot. Mm-hmm. And with this particular show too, I mean, this was a like well-respected person in the community, and we hadn't really brought in outside people before. This was a new thing. Mm-hmm. So for me, it kind of like established this fear or amplified this fear that I already had, which was, oh, is the community not taking us seriously? So like it turned from this one person isn't to, oh, is this how the community views us? Mm-hmm. And that obviously as we've gone on, you know, with our increased just experience levels and stuff, I think that idea has dissipated a bit. I mean, there's still, I mean, I know personally there's another group in this area that talks about us like we don't know what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And I challenge that. I mean, we clearly do. We've done it a lot, and we've had some great results from it. Mm-hmm. But that being said, you know, it's this feeling of underdog, and this is going to be a repeated theme throughout our experience, and I still feel it to this day. When you have companies near you that have obviously way larger budgets that don't care to speak nicely about you. Mm-hmm. You know, it instills this feeling of, oh, we're lower, we're the underdogs, we have to prove ourselves, constantly having to prove ourselves. So, again, dealt with bigger, badder, and worse, and this is one of the examples of that.
Early examples.
Yeah, when we say we've dealt with bigger, badder, and worse, this is one of the ones that we mean. And it was definitely like okay, every time we're with this person, our guard has to be up. Mm-hmm. We have to, you know, shoulders back, chest out, like kind of like mark our territory of like, hey, we're in charge here, and you need to know where your place is. Mm-hmm. And those aren't easy conversations to have, especially when you're having it with someone who is very loud and their voice takes up the room. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, but do you have additional kind of thoughts on that? But that was the initial like, okay, this is going to be a little tough moment.
Yeah, it definitely was something that after our experience with Heathers, I was not anticipating with Spring Awakening, but I think we both had very high hopes going into that process, and like you said, the end product was very, very something to be very proud of. It was a beautiful piece, but I think from that early phase in the process, seeing that happen and trying to work through that and figure out a strategy for that was not something I was anticipating following Heathers.
No,
in
me
any
neither.
way, shape, or form.
I mean, we were still riding the high of Heathers. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I wasn't anticipating it either, and it was just a reminder that there's always going to be something.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Always going to be something that you're going to have to deal with. It doesn't matter how successful you are or you think you are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But other than that, auditions, I remember there was a moment where I kind of like started to freak out because we didn't have the same level of numbers that we had for the other shows.
Yeah.
Now this was a smaller show, so we didn't need as many people, but it was about half and half, girls and guys, and everyone had to be super talented. Mm-hmm. So that was a struggle. That's actually where I remember we were out in the lobby waiting for people, and I think my dad had brought us coffee, and I think this is where I said the iconic line, we're small town stars, not small town schmucks.
Oh,
and it was funny. Well, it's funny now, but at the time I was like, where are the people at? This is bad. Luckily we ended up having the people we needed to make a great show and to have a stacked cast. So that was great. And we also did auditions for the adult roles in advance. So we had already had those cast. And part of that was because those aren't really coveted like musical theater roles. Right. And we had a feeling that if we held open auditions for them, like people wouldn't really know the show, wouldn't really know those roles, and wouldn't be super interested. So we did them in advance to make sure we had them, and we did, and I was super excited about that. But that was auditions, and then we got into rehearsals.
Oh, did we ever?
We did.
I think the most important thing we have to discuss about with rehearsals was we have now moved to our third rehearsal space.
Yes, the Jesus Saves
building room. Yeah. So for those of you following along at home, we started out in Miranda's backyard with Grease. Heather's, we moved into the garage barn combination.
Yep.
Bathroom outside in the porta potty. We had cows up on the hill.
Yep.
And then this third location we refer to as the Jesus Saves room, and we call it that because written on the wall inside was a beautiful mural that just said Jesus Saves on it. Still did not have a bathroom.
Nope.
Still kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
I'm pretty sure there was some mold on the ceiling.
There was definitely some mold on the ceiling.
Yep.
Yeah, we continue to we enhance and improve our spaces as we move along, and yes, that we will be in that space for almost shorter than 2 years.
Yeah, we don't move till after the pandemic.
Yeah,
and the irony kind of the space was. It was a building next to someone's house, and the people that lived in the house ran a program outside of a church, basically, for young mothers, for like teen moms, and they would use that building, but they only used it once a week. So we ended up using it the other days, and I think doing Spring Awakening there was actually kind of cool. Like the fact that they were like supporting these young moms, and this is a story about how young women are manipulated in society, and the kind of struggles they go through, and like, you know, if Venla had been able to make her own choices, she would have been one of those young moms that needed support. So just an interesting kind of parallel there. Yeah, we were in there. I remember one of the first struggles I had. We were working with someone who, this is a different person than who I mentioned earlier, but very well intended, asked for the rehearsal schedule, and I sent it to them, and some of the songs in the show have swear words in them. So like the title of the song has the F word in it. And I didn't realize that she was asking for the schedule so she could send it to the church woman who owned the space. Yeah. So I sent her the schedule with the song titles on it, and then I get frantic texts from this poor woman who's just like, what are you doing in there? I didn't know this was the type of show you were doing, blah, blah, blah. And again, not her fault. She didn't have the context of the show, the message of the show. She just had the song titles, which I will say are aggressive.
They are. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then I remember having a talk with this team member afterwards, like, hey, if it's going to her, I'm going to be a little more sensitive because she hasn't fully read the show, and there's no need to freak her out because we're not doing anything like nefarious in there. It's just, these are the titles and the songs. So she, you know, the woman who owned the space who talked to me was like, make sure you don't leave any scripts out. We have kids in there, blah, blah, blah. I was like, we won't, I promise. And luckily she was, you know, as cool about it as she could be. But I definitely, at the time, I was like, oh my God, I think we just lost our space. We didn't, but, you know, there's lots of moments, like, especially when you're a nonprofit group. Well, we weren't even fully nonprofit yet, but when you're a community theater and you're starting out and you're trying to get established, part of how you're operating is via favors from people, or, you know, people being generous. And this was one of those situations where we had a rehearsal space because this woman was very generous to us. And with that, though, means it can go away at any moment. And that causes a lot of logistical issues if that happens. So I was definitely aware of that, and I was definitely afraid that was going to happen.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about that space, just in general, was that it had a very large room. It was just a very long room.
Yep.
And it was great for working on those numbers. But one of my favorite memories that I have, and again, we're back in the space for Legally Blonde and Godspell.
Yep.
But one of my favorite things about this show and rehearsing in this space was we wanted to maintain the same mindset that we had with Heather's, where we could have the set accessible as we're rehearsing, which was excellent and a game changer for us. And a lot of, the set was essentially reused from Heather's. We did make some modifications to it, but it was mostly still that platform with stairs, and, we'll talk about trees here in a minute. But,
we sure will.
Yeah. I'll just never forget being in that space the first day, and we had the set one way, and it was these giant boxes, and we did our first rehearsal, which I want to say, if I remember correctly, our first rehearsal was The Dark I Know Well.
That sounds right.
And I only remember that because I remember it was the one rehearsal we had for that show where the set was facing outside of the building, and in order for us to see everything and to record everything, we had to be standing out on the front porch of the building because of the length of the space.
Yep.
And as soon as that rehearsal was over, we went back in and rotated everything in the other direction, and that's how it stayed for the rest of the process.
Yeah,
but
we did have to move two pieces off, I think, to rotate it. So their platform was a little shorter, but they had more floor space, like what they would have in the theater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so from that standpoint, it was just a really unique space to be using, and also there was so much to do in that space too. There were couches, there were pool tables, so much stuff going on in that space. So definitely an upgrade from our barn experience the year prior. But it was it was a nice space for what we needed it for from that standpoint.
Oh, exactly.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And we, I'm not exaggerating when I say we could not have afforded to pay for a rehearsal space.
Right.
It wouldn't have happened. We would have been rehearsing in basements before that happened. Mm-hmm. So this was, to have a space, to have a key to it, that was huge. Yeah. And we had the porta potty out back, and we made it work. Mm-hmm. And it did what we needed it to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was definitely, it was definitely fun having our set in there.
For sure.
And then when we did the read-through, I don't know if you remember this, but, two of our leads went to the wrong space.
Oh,
they ended up going to, a space in Baltimore or something, and they called me, and I was like, you're at the wrong place, and they had put in the wrong address, so they weren't there for, all of Act 1.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah. It was kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
It was.
I was super excited for that space, though, because it was, 25 minutes closer to where I was living at the time than the year prior. So, it was accessible, but gosh, it was out in the middle of nowhere.
It was. It definitely felt like an upgrade at the time, for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
having a building and, a driveway
yes.
to put cars. It felt like a big upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of transitioning into, rehearsals specifically.
Yeah.
I do think this is a perfect example of that. I wish I had the intimacy training and knowledge that I do now when we were doing this show. Mm-hmm. I think we did the best with the resources that we had at the time. Mm-hmm. But also, intimacy coordinators in theater were honestly relatively new when we were doing this.
Absolutely.
They were kind of a luxury position. So if you were at a professional theater that could afford to hire one, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but it was definitely a newer thing that was not considered a necessity but a luxury. And now, we use them all the time. I used one just the other day. Luckily we have people usually in our cast who have intimacy training, and I'll utilize them for certain scenes. But just the other day we have a show with 2 kisses in it, and I had an intimacy coordinator go through it with them, because why not?
Exactly.
If they're there, why not? And those were just for kiss scenes, not sex scenes. This was a big deal to be asking performers to do. Mm-hmm. And I definitely think oh gosh, I wish we would have had an intimacy coordinator there, but we did some things right. It was a closed rehearsal for that scene, which is what you're supposed to do, and we talked them through everything. and made sure they were comfortable to the best of our ability.
Absolutely.
But yeah, just thinking back on it, like, knowing what we know now and having the resources we have now, it's just, it's actually like a nice feeling knowing that if we were to do the show again, we would actually be able to provide a lot more support than we were at the time.
Yeah, I remember that being a conversation and like what that process looked like in order to maintain the integrity of the material and making sure that our actors were safe. And that was something that we always were focused on. But I agree with you. I feel like we've become better at knowing what those skills are and reaching out to the right people to make sure that we're giving our actors the best opportunity that they can to present those moments authentically and safely.
Right. And I think what's so great about intimacy coordinators is they're advocates for the actors. And I think especially when you're a young actor and you're put in a vulnerable position like that, sometimes you say yes to the directors just because you think that's what they want to hear, and you're not necessarily in a space where you feel comfortable fully advocating what your boundaries are, or even like maybe you don't even know what your boundaries are, and it's at the time when we're just trying to block, it's difficult to fit in those important conversations. So that's why I love intimacy coordinators is they're kind of that gap of like they don't have the level of authority a director has, so you hope that they can have more of a personable relationship with the cast members so they can get that important information. For this particular show, I think something that worked in our favor is the two actors who had to do that scene were dating at the time, and I think that kind of helped them feel more comfortable with what they had to do on stage. But it's still tough. It's an intense scene.
Absolutely.
It's part of what makes the scene so difficult too is it's not like Dead Girl Walking and Heathers where it's funny and very clear that it's consensual on both ends. This is kind of like a rough portrayal of sex on stage, and that just makes it a lot more difficult to create that environment that you want for your actors. So, nevertheless, I think we definitely did what we could at the time, and I am proud of how it turned out, and I think it looked great, and I believe the actors, were comfortable, but yeah, just very, very glad that we've progressed as a theater community and have implemented these additional resources to help actors and creative teams be successful in these situations.
Absolutely. I mentioned earlier as a slight transition out of that conversation to another big piece that we had to tackle in this show. We maintained the idea of being back for where we were performing at. We wanted to maintain the integrity of having a smaller set, a more intimate set, a set that did not move, did not have very many scene changes. But with that meant we needed to find creative ways to do some transitioning.
Sure
and
did.
Miranda, you and I came up with quite the solution to do those transitions, and that was in the way of fake trees.
Oh, yeah.
And to this day, I have to tell you, and I know you know this because I bring it up all the time, I have never in my life had a more chaotic scene change process than what you and I did with trying to arrange those trees. We had big trees. We had 8 trees. They were all different varying sizes.
We should write a children's book about the trees.
We should. We had trees doing all sorts of things during the show. At moments, they were creating more intimate locations on the stage. So they were in semicircles at the front of the stage. We had trees that were along the back of the platform. And throughout the show, they were choreographed to move to these different locations using the entirety of our ensemble to create these spaces. What that meant was we had to make sure that each tree aligned in its correct location every single time.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, me thinking about it now, each person should have been assigned to the same tree every single time. That would have made life a whole lot easier. But no. Everyone had different trees each time. Sometimes someone was on the big tree. Sometimes people moved 2 trees. Sometimes the trees moved upstage. Sometimes they moved downstage. And to this day, I still have this memory of, we had a book.
Oh, yeah.
We had a binder.
Yeah, we did.
That was the tree binder.
Mm-hmm. And it had, like, laminate little
page
sleeves.
Protectors. Yeah. Page protectors. And printed on white paper were sticky... so printed on the paper was a design of the stage, and with sticky notes and markers and pens.
Yep.
We showed every scene in that show, every transition in that show.
The most organized we've ever been.
The most organized we had ever been. And Miranda, to this day, I still can't understand why the questions were asked about where those trees went. We got to a point where we had numbers on every tree so we could mark where the numbers went in the book. We had them color coordinated with the spikes on the stage. And we still, to this day, joke about being asked, should the red tree be going on the green spike, or should the red tree be going on the red spike? Those trees, to this day, I have to see if I still have one of these diagrams somewhere.
Okay, we have to address what you just said, because it's one of my favorite memories with you ever.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Which was there was the very good actor, very sweet person came up to us and said, Joel, I'm confused because I've been putting the red tree on the green spike. Is that what I'm supposed to be doing? Mm-hmm. And you were just standing. It was like the glow tape moment from Heathers.
Oh, yes.
You took a moment. And you were like, no. The red tree goes on the red spike. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards we were having our phone calls and you were like, oh no, we're just doing Christmas code. And just red trees go on green spikes, green trees go on red spikes, just whatever holiday theme you're feeling is what we're doing.
I, like we said at the beginning of this conversation, very proud of the way this show ended up. And those trees did exactly what they were supposed to do, but it was quite the production to get them there.
I grabbed those trees from Goodwill. And there was a moment, I had pizza boxes in my trunk. We had just had a pizza day with the cast. And I went to pick up trees. I went to stop at Goodwill. I saw 3 trees. And I was like, 3? We needed 8. So finding 3 in one building, huge. Okay? I go up to buy them. People are like, do you want help getting them to your car? And I didn't really. But, like, I kind of needed help because it was just me and these were taller than me. It's like, yeah. So I walk out. I open my trunk. It wasn't empty pizza boxes. Pizza was still in there. Just like 24-hour-old pizza in these boxes. And these poor, like, Goodwill employees are loading these trees in my car. And I was like, I feel like a foul, filthy person right now. And, like, I've definitely, like, changed my lifestyle since then. Like, I clean my car out very regularly now. But at the time, it was definitely a moment of time, like, I feel like just my car was a symbol. Like, I just did not have my life together in that moment.
Oh, my gosh.
And I felt so dirty. I was like, oh, God, and they're seeing my shame, and this is horrible. But we need to make rehearsals a 2-parter, because I have more stories, and I think the trees are a great way to end part 1.
I agree with you on that. Yeah, I've got so many more stories from the
trees for days.
Trees, and nothing but trees.
But before we leave, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Do I put the red tree on the green spike?
Miranda, you're in charge. You can put whatever tree you want anywhere.
Can we do rainbow themes? So, like, if I have a pink tree, can I just put it on a blue spike or a purple spike?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I will say to people who still work with us, I believe that we still have at least one of these trees in storage. And I can almost confidently say, if you look at the base of that tree, there's still spike tape in there. So
I'm gonna have to pull it out and get a picture.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I'm sure there's still a piece of spike tape at the bottom.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, so trees and all the trees. But
we'll be
back with more stories next time.
All right. See you next time, Snarkies.
Alrighty.